I am so glad to see all of you. This is a very special talk for me because Manjima and I have made many plans in the last couple of years, 3 years, since her book Mannequin came out. You know, we wanted to do workshops, we wanted to do talks, and finally, the unintended consequence, the silver lining of the pandemic for us at Prajnya has been that we were able to bring our friends into our digital space, at least without any forbidding costs. I am happy to have her here. She's going to speak on the body as a resource, new directions in the study of gender and sexual labor. I would like to introduce her, although she has disappointingly shared only like 3 sentences out of her many accomplishments. I think that women are unnecessarily modest about what they do. And when you ask for bios, they send you as little as they can. You know, it's as if, here it is, here is something you can call a bio, but I won't tell you any more about myself. We need to get over this. On that note, Dr. Manjima Bhattacharjya is a feminist researcher and writer based in Mumbai. She has been part of the Indian women's movement for over 2 decades. She holds a PhD in sociology and works in the development sector. Her areas of specialization include gender and sexuality and labor and the body. She has been a fellow of the New India Foundation and is the author of Mannequin, Working Women in India's Glamour Industry, which was published by Zuban in 2018, and Intimate City, which is about to be published by Zuban as we speak. I think it's actually available on Amazon already, isn't it?
No, it's out as an ebook in their store right now, Swarna. And in June, we'll have it in print and on Amazon, etc.
Okay. Her first book, which is actually how I came to know her, was an edited volume, Sarpanch Sahib, on women sarpanches, which was longlisted for the Crossword Best Nonfiction Book Award of 2009. She is Manzibar on social media, and I'll spell that out if you want to follow her, at MANZIBARR. I'm so happy to have you here. I cannot tell you enough. So thank you. Over to you. Please keep your connections on mute. You can type in the chat box, or in the question and answer segment, you can raise your hand and come in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swarna. And hello and good morning to everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So thank you. It's wonderful to be here, to get a chance to speak to you all. You know, sometimes it can get boring to talk about things that you've thought of already and written and it's out in the world as a book. But I find that actually these opportunities give me a chance to revisit and really build on some of the thinking that I've done and actually open up new ways of thinking about these things. So I appreciate the opportunity. I feel, I hope everybody can hear me fine, just to check on that. Great. Okay, so when I was going to do this talk, Swarna, I was like at a bit of a loss as to how to actually link the different kinds of work that I've been doing. And Swarna was very helpful in suggesting that actually I look at the journey of thinking on the around the body and linking what I've done in my first book, which is Mannequin, the cover you can see here, and Intimate City, which is a more recent work which I did as part of a postdoctoral fellowship at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences as part of something called the Urban Aspirations Project that they had. And just to tell you a little bit about how I thought I'd talk about, I'd sort of organize this talk. First, I thought we'll talk about some of the fault lines which have existed in feminist thinking around feminist protest around the body, whether it's been in beauty pageants and so on, or the objectification of women. Then I'll talk a little bit about how I think I was able to push through those tensions. Um, and then a little bit about what I learned really from my work on mannequin and really looking at
Manjima,
the
there's a
life.
request that you speak a little louder.
A little louder, or maybe.
Yeah, maybe lean into the mic or bring that.
Yeah. So Mannequin was about women working in India's glamour industry as models. And what lessons did they really tell me or teach me about women working in general? That's something I want to share a bit about. And then exploring a bit about the body and how we can really conceptualize it as a resource for women. Moving on to some new thinking of what really my new book brought out. And because I know the history of this, Prajnya Gender Talks are feminist history roundtables, I thought I'd delve a little bit to begin with into the history of feminist protest around fashion and beauty and pageants. So, actually, fashion and feminism have been posited as enemies since the 1960s. In fact, American second wave feminism began with the 1969 protests against the Atlanta beauty pageant. To say that we're more than what we wear or what we look like, and these are the kind of messages that came out. In fact, it was here that women symbolically threw clothing into this trash can, including the odd bra, which gave them the bra burning moniker. Actually, in the West, um, the main contention was that women's bodies are being objectified. And this was alongside, at that time, sexist advertising in America was at a peak. In fact, many of their very famous ads were considered very sexist at the time, as well as the critique of corsets, high heels, makeup, and so on as being a limited role for women in as it symbolized the tremendous unfreedom in Western feminism. In contrast, the Indian debates on objectification were very different. Um, it had a really different face. It was mostly around the representation of women, what was called the indecent representation of women. In fact, feminists fought for an act called the Indecent Representation of Women Act in 1986. In 1988, so you had these landmark cases, you had um, small protests against pageants, with placards saying ban the beauty pageant. So very simplistic kind of understanding of what was happening. And Pati Parmeshwar was a film um, which the censor board actually came down against, saying that it promoted ignoble servility. It was about a devoted Hindu wife uh, who continues to, you know, uh, her lord, her husband, uh, is adulterous, but she continues to sort of be his faithful, devoted wife. And feminists sided with the censors, saying that this was actually what objectification was in the Indian context, this ignoble servility. There were also, I think, feminist activists of the late 80s, early 90s remember protesting vigilante acts, of blackening billboards with sexist ads or following due process and really writing to companies who they felt had sexist ads to have them removed. At the time, conceptually, they do, I mean, there is a recollection of actually confusing skin show with sexism. So, really seeing posters of films like Blue Lagoon at the time, which was a Brooke Shields movie, seeing those kinds of things as semi pornographic and protesting against them. So it was I think when I did interviews with feminists about that era, there was some embarrassment in really thinking back at that and thinking that, oh, okay, maybe we were being moralistic and, it's what the right wing would do now. Um, so it was only, this is 1994 when Sushmita Sen won the Miss Universe, and then there was this shift, and India became a new market for beauty products, and it also started the movement of many young women from their homes from their villages, from towns, from small cities, to bigger towns and metros to become models, because they felt that there would be no sort of they wouldn't have to they could, by imitating or mimicking or really becoming physically what they thought was the the traits of a model or someone, or a beauty pageant winner, they could really climb like they could achieve social mobility through that. um, and this is also, so this is when in 1996, when India hosted the ABCL Corporation actually hosted the Miss World pageant in India. And just going to give you a sense of the kind of protests that there were, I mean, people sort of came to the streets. Bangalore came to a standstill. There were three streams of protest. There was the left that was protesting globalization, actually. I mean, as if like they would have protested Kentucky Fried Chicken, they were protesting Miss World. There was the right, who was protesting the corruption of Indian culture, and who really took very badly to this thing that there would be women parading in bikinis in the pageant. Then there were the left leaning feminists who had moved from objectification to actually commodification, who were concerned that Indian women, the idea of beauty was going to be sort of become something that Indian women would aspire to, and that markets would be conquered through this commodification of women. However, these three nuances were just sort of brushed aside, and it was all painted. The discourse was sort of set by the right wing, really, that it was against Indian culture. And so this is just a sense of the protests.
If there's sound, Manjima, we can't hear it.
Okay, there is sound, but so this is just to give you a sense of actually the kind of thing that happened at that time. Of course, things are very different now. Um, as as this will show you, this was in 2017, where this T-shirt saying we should all be feminists was the rage. But it was in 1997, actually, after the protest against Miss World, that I sort of joined the women's movement, and I was coming into a space where the critique of beauty pageants as being a nationalism ki goli, like a pill of nationalism, was really strong, and there was a lot of tension and conflict between the two. So to go into the field and start interviewing models was very challenging, because I was part of protests and so on, and so it felt like I would be judging the women I was interviewing. um, it was also unusual at the time to do research with middle class women. Most academics would go into villages or to urban slums, and there was this sort of natural assumption that I can just go into anyone's house and start interviewing them. But I think there was a hesitation to actually do the same with middle class women. So there were several challenges, but I think to overcome the tension between fashion and feminism was primary, and what helped was actually using ethnography as a method, because it allowed women to really be reflexive about their own lives, and more importantly, I think, to be able to, through the analysis, really understand modeling as labor, to have a conceptual framework that really linked what women did across classes or across ideological divides, was very, very significant. And I'm going to pull that out for a closer look going on. The third aspect was, of course, that over the last 15, 20 years, the wider context has really changed. So even though when I started writing Mannequin, it was actually about women working in the glamour industry. By the end of it, it was actually about the changing relationship between fashion and feminism. And I guess that's the journey of writing anything. You start off thinking you're going to be talking about something, and then you realize that, oh, it's actually about something, something else entirely. um, of course, it was the context also that forced fashion and feminism to actually not uh, to really for for feminists to for both sides to really come together and defer any conversation about objectification, commodification, and so on. Because in the face of right wing ideologies growing around the world, there were challenges around everything, anything that women wore, really. So coming back to this idea of modeling as labor, so I think always this the conceptual framework that links us and them has been so important in feminist movements. And I remember Nandita Gandhi, the feminist scholar, talking about how Mathura made us all feminists, and the idea of rape, that any woman could be raped, was what actually brought middle class women in Bombay out onto the streets, and the Forum Against Rape in Bombay to be created in 1980. So, modeling through the narratives, I think, models would keep talking about how it was a job like any other, but not like any other job. And these both sound contradictory, but actually, what they meant was that it was a job like any other in the sense that it was gendered labor. It was considered just an extension of women's natural proclivity to dress up. That there was nothing to just walking the ramp, etc., etc. It was easy labor. It was labor that women, that sort of fell into this bucket of domestic labor, care labor, looking good. What's there in that? That kind of understanding existed around it. And importantly, it was informal labor. I was so surprised that all their whatever they would say, it fit perfectly into the characteristics of the informal sector that has been defined so well by Nirmala Banerjee in 1980. And it was also labor that was unionized for a while. In India in 2002, there was an effort to start a union called Models United, which did not work. And much later on, now in the West, we have something called the Model Alliance, which was started in 2012, but only 2017 onwards they've sort of become more active. And it is surprising actually how simple some of the demands are. And this slide will show you that, I mean, really, the negotiation is only to have a private changing area backstage at New York Fashion Week. So that's the level of non lack of power actually that that models have in the industry, being who seemingly seem to be in this like spotlighted, but actually are very, very low in terms of the negotiation power they have. And what did they mean that it's not like any other job? The central element is really the way the body is used. Doing things with your hair, like so many stories of young women fainting in the because of heavy hairdos and so on. But really, also behind the scenes, the kind of body work that it takes, like dancers, athletes, and so on, to really keep their body in a shape that will be marketable. So the idea of going to the gym, uh, plastic surgery, the diets, etc., etc. There's a massive amount of body work involved. In fact, Cindy Crawford has a famous saying, "Even I don't wake up looking like Cindy Crawford." And this is the fuller explanation, where women themselves have, there is an increasing realization that really there is a lot of labor that goes into creating that image. Um, then there is the sexualized labor, and there is increasing conversation around that as well. Um, this is like a parody sort of a thing of trying to do what of men trying to do what women models do. This is in the context of India. We have the Kama Sutra ads and so on. So this is a very specific part of modeling, this performing sexuality. So certain lexicon of poses and um, looks that are sexual in nature, and this is actually the relationship with their work, because it makes them subject to stigma much more than other sort of work. um, I'm going to move now to broader the lessons that I think I got from my interviews. And what was happening here, I realized, was actually that this was a new class of working women who were coming out post globalization, entering the workforce in India. And often they were the first generation of young women who had left their homes, who had come out into the working landscape, who were participating in the workforce. And I think, the things that we're talking about made me think that actually there is a framework within which it's not just models, but women in paid work generally experience uh, work or their workplace. And I have this picture of this film Mahanagar, because this is about also one period of time when a certain generation of women came out to work in the workplace. Um, and so I would say the three things within which women's working lives exist is the invisibility of their work, the conditionality, and the cost. So women's work is not always seen as work, even when they're in paid work. Often, so visibility is a problem. The more, because so much of middle class life is premised on seclusion of women, and even when you are working, you try and stay invisible because it also threatens existing status quo around you. There's the question of conditionality. So for models, so many of them would say, I'm allowed to work if I don't wear a bikini, or I'm allowed to work until I get married. And similarly, one hears women saying, I can work if I finish all the household chores in the morning, or I come back and I make sure that everything is ready for the next day. So there is a conditional element to really women joining the workforce. And finally, there's the question of the cost, which is the relationships which uh, are collateral because of tensions. There is, most importantly, there's stigma. And of course, the more for models it is stigma, it's the anxiety around sexuality. But stigma really extends to all, because the female body at work, in a sense, is always vulnerable to stigma, just by being by virtue of itself. And it feels like, even in corporate places, one would hear of rules which say, you can't wear sleeveless, you can't, no cleavage should be showing, you should dress in a certain way. So like there is the performance of sexuality within a occupation like modeling, actually in many other workplaces women are expected to perform asexuality all the time. So you're expected to be asexual and really to as a condition to your participating in the workplace. And I think the Me Too movement and the sexual harassment at the workplace sort of debates have brought this out. um, the idea that or the prejudice that having women in the workplace is just really increases. I mean, it's their fault that sexual harassment happens in the first place. um, Even in the lives of models, the body as being a bit of a problem, because you are, and I always think of this young woman who told me how she would go to auditions. She would first dress up, you know, cover herself properly, go and stand at the bus stop, and then she would be carrying all her things in a bag, and she would wait, and people would watch her, and then she would move. She would walk to the next bus stop if she felt that there were too many men stopping and wanting to, hit on her and harass her. And then she would go to her audition place. Then she would take everything off. She would transform. She would wash up, and then she would be there as a spectacle. So this between spectacle and surveillance, this kind of thing that young women's bodies get put through seems to be a recurring theme. If I sort of actually think about, the body has always been a resource. So from the gift of the Magi, the O. Henry story, where she cuts her hair to get money to buy a Christmas gift, or the film called Sahib, where the footballer, he sells a kidney, um, to make money. I mean, there is the body as a resource has always existed, but I think in recent times, really the conversations around sex work and surrogacy, actually feminist work on surrogacy, have been really important to understanding the body as a resource. And I mean, I was going to show a video, but I think if there's no sound, I think it is difficult. But I think I just want to. This is a film called "Can You See the Baby Bump?"
Has
Uh,
captions, no?
yeah, it has captions.
Also,
So,
Manjima, I'm getting comments that people can't hear you.
oh no,
Put
really?
out. No, they can, but it comes and goes. So
Okay.
Yeah, she would love to listen to some music.
Could we have a look today, or do you mind, Hasina? Wow.
Can you see now?
This Hasina, yeah, the time is going fast.
मुझे क्या लगता है ऐसे टाइम जल्दी जा रहा है कि तेरे लिए बहुत स्लो जा रहा है टाइम?
So this is at a facility where surrogates stay. This film is by Surabhi Sharma. It was produced by Sama, and I'm just going to take you to this particular point.
यहाँ पे सब अच्छा था, खाना पीना, मुझे तबीयत अच्छी हो गई थी। मैं पहले 43 मेरा वज़न 43 था। यहाँ पे मैडम ने मेरा 70 किलो वज़न बढ़ाया था। अच्छी हो गई थी तबीयत पानी में। मुझे बताया ऐसे से यहाँ पे इतना पेमेंट मिलता है, ऐसा सर्टिफिकेट करने से अपना ज़रूरत पूरा होता है। तो मैंने किया। यहाँ से करके जाने के बाद में एक घर बनाया मैंने वो पैसे से। घर बनाने के बाद में 2 साल के बाद में मैं वापस आया हूँ, दूसरा सर्टिफिकेट करने के लिए वापस आई हूँ। अभी मेरा तीसरा महीना चल रहा है।
मैं खा रही हूँ।
So this section in particular, I want to.
बिस्किट खिलाती हूँ, ये खाती नहीं बिस्किट। खत्म करने का ना, वो खुद नहीं खाती इसलिए सबको खिलाते हैं। खाती है तुम प्रज्ञा को। हम ट्राई करेंगे? मुझे अच्छा नहीं लगता है। हमें भी नहीं अच्छा लगता है, लेकिन खाना पड़ता है, क्या करें, वजन बढ़ाना पड़ता है ना, इसलिए। नहीं तो वो बिल्कुल भी नहीं, तो हम ऐसे खाते से चक चक। हम लोग के लिए नहीं है ये, बच्चे के लिए। आपको और पैसा मिलता है अगर बच्चे का वजन अभी मतलब 10,000 मिलेगा, वो भी 4 किलो का रहेगा ना, तो 4 किलो का चाय ये 100 ग्राम रहेगा, तो उससे ऊपर रहेगा तो वो पैसे मिलेगा। 3 किलो 100 ग्राम बच्चा रहेगा तो 10,000 रुपये एक्स्ट्रा। बच्चे के इनके अंदर 1 किलो वजन बढ़ता है।
So I mean, I think when I saw this, it was so striking to me for me because it reminded me of the conversations of girls in the Miss India pageants who go for the training process before, and there's this obsession with weight and eating, and really, it was just completely. I was able to draw a parallel immediately. There's another part here where where they talk about how they're asked to listen to bhajans so that the baby grows in a good environment, and it's similar to the kind of environment that is created for the Miss India pageant aspirants, so that the kind of lectures they have to go to, the kind of processes, the kind of curriculum that they are put through, so that the perfect batch of Miss Indias or Miss Universes will come out of the oven. So it was so I think these parallels have been very insightful to really understand the range of ways in which women are really for women, their body is a resource that the market actually recognizes and can be monetized, whatever the, and of course there are problems with that, but that's also something that is we need to acknowledge and recognize. And sex work, I think, has been the other big elephant. Elephants are big, but in the room, the sex wars, which were that's another area where the tension and conflict has always existed. The sex wars, which was fought between feminists of different ideological leanings. One was the abolitionists, who equated prostitution with violence. The other were groups of feminists who saw it as labor and who used the term sex work, which is actually which has been normalized, which is a wonderful thing. But one believed that women do not enter sex work of their own volition. The other believes that there is women can consent to trading in sex and so on. It's a very toxic space to work in. The standoff has been very bitter, including in India, and it's very complicated by the trafficking discourse, funding agendas, a rescue industry, um, and global agendas which are about really stemming international migration and the criminalization of sex work and continuing sort of a moral framework within which all of this is placed. So, so now moving to actually Intimate City, when I started my fellowship at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, again, I struggled with how to really get out of this sort of traffic jam. You know, it was you can't extricate yourself from it. Um, and I found that actually it was through using uh, other routes, which was using urban studies or geography, the idea of sex work geographies, which was really helpful. And so by changing the lens and actually having a different entry point, I was able to really see the wider context, see the web of relationships that existed, and really set women's decisions and choices against a broader their broader life trajectories, but also the broader macro shifts that were happening in the world. And so this is just some images of different sex work geographies. So whether it's in Bangkok or on the Netherlands, India, the dance bars or the red light areas, and the shifts on some of these, which I actually sought to look at. It was also, all these shifts are globalization driven. They're also in the context of this vision of having smart cities or liberal cities, which where sexual entertainment is available, easily available. It's sort of part of the set of expectations that people have from global, all around the world. There's What I also learned significantly was about the internet as a space where sexual transactions, commercial sexual transactions happen. And this is a heat map of basically, this is from one of the discourse analysis of over 100 websites that offer escort services in Mumbai, which is one major area that I looked at. And it, of course, it normalizes the availability of women and a partner for men. And this is what Elizabeth Bernstein, the scholar, called the girlfriend experience, how everybody's looking for the girlfriend experience, all men. But in India, it's actually much more beyond the girlfriend experience or post-industrial sexual commerce, as this expansion of the sex industry is called in the West. There's a combination of both the old styles of sex work. There is also very, very new kinds of sex work that's happening. And it's not actually just sex work, it's commercial transactions, sexual transactional sex of different kinds. And I'll just go into that a bit. As I said, it's located sort of in this idea of the global smart city, but it follows very local patterns. It's very local to its manifestation. And here I have, again, from the discourse analysis of these websites, these are the names of the escorts. So this is a mashup of the first names and the surnames. And you can see here the deployment of caste capital is very, very strong. So you'll see in the surnames, it's usually upper caste, middle caste, filmy surnames. So, you have names like which could be girls next door. It could be, girls from a film, but prominently, really, even though in India systems have existed and many feminists have really done a lot of wonderful work on that, on the availability of or the access of men to the bodies of women who are from Dalit backgrounds. And there has been, that alongside that, there's been the seclusion of upper and middle caste women. And the internet sort of seems to suggest or implies that here you can have access to upper caste, middle caste women. And that's the I mean, there's a complicated sort of understanding of that, because it is really employing not just body capital like models might be using, but also caste and cultural capital, adding to that. um, but besides these kind of sort of scenarios, I think what Intimate City again started out with a title which was Sex Work Geographies. And over the course of writing it, it became Intimate City. And that is because so the internet creates a really unique environment. And I think for the first time, I could see how consent was being so clearly articulated. It was so clear cut. Whereas, in the offline kind of stories, one heard about very vague understand that there was guessing games which are happening. That is this massage parlor open to really providing sexual services? Is it not? What should I read? Should I read? Is this no? Is this yes? Whereas on the internet, the really spelling it out was important. Discussions on consent were everywhere, um, even though there were limits to that, which I do discuss in the book as well. Um, I also found that there were very fluid categories online. It was so hard to actually distinguish between who's a sex worker, who's a pimp, who's a client. It was all very fluid. Often one found a client who would also be providing services, or who would be a person who paid for services would also be a person who was paid for services. So it was a very, very fluid categories. One also found male service providers and women as clients, which I think was a big shift in which can offer a big shift if we do more research. So I sort of touched on the tip of that iceberg in a sense. um, Also, one finds that it's not only money that is transacted, it is many other things in kind. So it is like holidays, gifts, opportunities, and so on. So it is much broader than money. And it is also not it in many cases, it's a clear cut financial decision that women or men would choose to have transactional sex or seek transactional sex. But it is not just precarity, it is also fantasy, it's curiosity, it's alienation, it's loneliness in a city. And so all of these sort of really made me think a little differently about the body as a resource to draw on for your own pleasure and for your own to really expand your life experiences in that sense. And here, I mean, on the internet, I think when there's also, it's the mind and the body sort of come together in a different way, the way that many of the narratives have shown me. And it brought me this idea that the body as private, really, and I think Paramita Vora has talked about, she talked about in a talk once about how there is the private, there's the public, and there's the personal. I think for feminists, we often think in terms of the personal and the political, but then there is this other realm, which is the private. And what one finds online in these new sort of platforms, that there's a search for intimacy that's private, that may or may not fit into our conceptualizations of whether it's work, whether it's sex work, whether it's violence. And it is people who are seeking connections with their own bodies and with others. And I wonder if actually we need to look at the right to privacy as a framework within which this kind of transactional sex sex can be located. And it's an argument that lawyers have used in the past in the anti-homosexuality laws, struggle against 377 and so on, of queer people's right to privacy. And I wonder if that is a lens that we can actually apply to understand women's agency in receiving and providing transactional sex. So these are all, of course, this is all work in progress, and these ideas really build on many other things that many excellent scholarly work that that has happened already in the past. And yes, I think I'll end here. I hope I haven't gone too fast. I hope you've all heard me. These are the two books. They're available on zubanbooks.com. Mannequin is on Amazon, and Zuban and Intimate City will come soon. And I'm really looking forward to hearing people's response to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Manjima. I see there's already a raised hand with a question here. So, Kanika?
Hi, sorry. I'm sorry if I'm going to shock anybody over here, because I know largely we're all feminists here, but I am not a feminist. And I mean, I don't mean that a feminist being a feminist is something wrong, but I fight for women's rights. But at the same time, I have a great issue with being lectured about how I should use my body. As an adult, I feel women, especially in today's day and age, when women have so much exposure to the internet and a lot of, especially cities, there are women who, whatever they want to do with their body, I feel that's right, as long as it's not they're not being exploited. If I want to enter into a beauty pageant, and if I want to further my career, or if I want, because I've been an actor and I've always played the vamp in films for the last 33 years, and I would be judged in social circles because I would wear a mini skirt on the screen. I would probably never wear it outside, not because of anything, but I generally had that, I used to be a shy person outwardly, but when I was on the screen, I would obviously do the role and, whatever the role demanded. But with this, this feminist, what should I say, storm that suddenly came over, I suddenly felt that there were a lot of women who, I also felt the same, that, why are you wearing this, or why is she doing this, or why is she a model, or why is she, that is my personal space, and that's my body, what I want to do with it, even if I want to have casual sex. And so I think that the whole idea of one of the reasons why we are not reaching the youth with really with gender I don't know how to the right word for it. Why we're not reaching the youth is because we tend to tell them what is not right and that this is not right, and we have this we don't allow them to have agency, even where surrogacy is concerned. I feel if a woman feels that she wants to produce babies and make money out of it, it's fine, as long as there's no exploitation, and as long as it's a fair playing field where you get money, you do the job, it's like that. So I know a lot of you are going to get shocked with this, but this is how I feel, and a lot of youngsters feel the same way, because while I was studying law with youngsters just recently, I was with 20-year-olds and I was 50-year-olds studying law, and I would interact a lot with my colleagues in the college, and this is how they would speak. They would just they would just become deaf to people who would start lecturing them about their body, about their clothes, about their lifestyle, about what they want to do with their body. So I just want to know, Manjima, how can we reach the youth to get them sensitized to the fact that this is your body, you can use it the way you want, but it should not be objectified. I don't know how, because it's a very, it's gray area there. Thank you.
Do you want to take them as they come, Manjima?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Kanika. I do agree with you that women have to have a choice. Women have the choice to use their body the way they want.
I can't hear you, Manjima, sorry. You're a very soft-spoken person, I can see.
Can you hear me now, Kanika?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. I'm almost swallowing the mic, but I can. I agree. So we often get stuck when we say, look, it's my choice, it's my body, it's my right? But and actually there's no way to go ahead from that conversation, because that's true, it is everyone's choice, but these choices don't happen in a vacuum. So they happen in a macro context, where something is valued more than others. So if so I mean, this is what, for example, has Russia has struggled with. Like, even though there was a time when Russia, astronauts and engineers were the sort of the dream for young women, whereas but that's shifted considerably over time. So actually what is happening at the macro level is important to look at. I feel that um, that I really want to ask if women really have the kind of choice they really believe they do. If what is it really determined by? So you're saying women might choose to have babies and stay at home, but really that is what is expected of them. There are so many punishments if you do one thing, if you don't do the other, and by that I mean social punishments. What you just said about the stigma that happens if you wear a mini skirt, I remember a situation where a woman had broke up with her boyfriend because she did an ad for a lounge bar called Bed. And the tagline was, "Would you go to bed with me?" Referring to the lounge bar. And she said, "I was fully clothed. There was nothing else except one line." And the fallout of that on her life was that, her relationship ended. So there is so you're absolutely right. So she actually then does not have the choice in that sense, because she has to face the consequences of what happens with that. So what I feel is that actually we have to look at respectability, and really try and understand why is it that this sexuality, like really indicating why this kind of control over what women do with our bodies, because actually it feels like there isn't that freedom doesn't exist. How can we reach the youth? I think more than ever younger women identify as feminists. I mean, when I started 20 years ago, it was odd to call yourself a feminist. So I mean, I have dropped the word feminist from saying I'm a researcher and writer. I no longer say I'm a feminist researcher and writer. I feel that
I
there are
think,
so many women who do identify as feminists.
sorry,
Any
your voice was lagging. I think you have to put your video off because there's some problem with your internet. So, sorry, Manjima, did I cut you? You want to say something else? Because I'd like to add this.
No, I just want to end by saying that, things are complicated because people are trying to maximize, like they're trying to do the best with the lives that they have at the individual and micro level. And so even people might work in organizations or institutions that are exploitative. So it's okay, the exploitation doesn't happen with you, but if you're the company you're working in, or the organization you're working in is exploiting, I don't know, tribal somewhere else, there is still a system of exploitation at work.
That's
So
true.
there are, it's more complicated than that. I think we're all trying to do the best we can. So
No, I appreciate that. And just little, would like to add, if I have permission, that this respectability, that we must be in respectable level. Who decides respectability? I decide my respectability. And why should women be craving for respectability? Like that boyfriend who dumped that poor girl. I think it was more out of peer pressure what his friends are going to think because of this respectability, tag that we put. I feel that's what I feel.
Swarna, you're on mute.
I was just going to invite Viraja to ask her question or make a comment. But, you don't really need me to. Please come in. Or if she stepped away, Sunita.
Okay, I want to go.
Yeah.
This is Biraja. So taking away from it's not exactly a question, just an extension of thought, what the post-presentation, the discussion, and also something Manjima mentioned in her presentation. So one thing I would like to add is that choice, if we really break down into the kind of feminism that is going on right now, we are so much focused on choice. Of course, it is a framework that we are holding, but in a society like in India, where what choice is very much grounded in caste. What kind of choices we make is also because of our caste upbringing, because of our caste conditionalities. So if I choose to be with friends with somebody, it becomes very much visible that our friend circles are from our own class and caste circles. So choice cannot be like, I mean, I feel the framework kind of falls short. Rather, we should look at materiality as a framework, like how material conditions are of all kinds of women, or different class, caste, gender, ethnicity, and all. And another thing is that in the Manjima, towards the end of her presentation, said that we should look into sex work, like sex in a private space. I mean, intimacy in a private space, and look at sex work in with right to privacy, and also refer to homosexual, anti-homosexual, like the fight against anti-homosexual acts in India, like basically the Section 377 judgments. So basically, I would like to see that what happened after that judgment. Basically, all the petitioner were the urban queer elites, and what happened to that? I mean, what happened post the judgment is that now, in like we say that two people can have sex inside their bedroom, but there is also a public life to homosexuality. Like there are cruising spaces, there are trans people on the street, there are trans people doing sex work, and most of people who are from the working class and Dalit, like the lower caste, experience sexuality in a public domain. So in this conversation, we just, and right to privacy is kind of a, also, while there is a trafficking act which is going, like which is currently in the parliament, which says that that if you see your tenant doing something, it empowers the uh, or owner of the house, gives the owner of the house a kind of power that you should complain. So this kind of surveillance in this world, in this kind of framework, how do we say that right to privacy is where we ground into? I think that's a kind of extension of thought, because I think right to privacy is very much grounded in a urban centric, elitist and casteist and classist ideology, because most of us who are in working class, we kind of use our body as a resource in public domain. So yeah, and also add to that, there is smart cities that is growing on, where there are so many lights. So protection of women, like cis women, when we say that there are lights, smart city and all, that is kind of taking away from the right of trans women to do sex work, because trans women are beaten, like they are hounded by mobs if they would stand in a light. So how do we look at all these framework? Because we can't use a framework where safety of a particular kind of women becomes a threat for another kind of a woman. So yeah.
That's a great question, Beraja. I'll start with your comment on the choice framework falling short. I absolutely agree, and similarly for agency as a framework, which also falls short, because what do we do with agency that is actually that harms the feminist sort of utopia, idea of a feminist utopia? So whether, and we have always struggled with that, whether it is women who choose to do sex selective abortions, or join the right wing groups. So we have examples of that also. I think these are ultimately frameworks, and I think it is important to constantly critique them and really move towards a new one. The choice framework is preventing us actually from moving ahead on several issues, and I would agree with you there. On this idea of, I think it's very important points, gender and sex work, or and actually the public domain. The right to privacy, I think I bring up here because actually the digital divide very much exists. So there is that bias in the study that I did, which is that it is with people who have access to the internet and who are operating online. At the same time, there was clear evidence that actually lot of women who have moved out of red light areas in Kamatipura are using the internet and entering the escort space, which is very differentiated, and it's actually not necessarily as classist as you would imagine. It is actually a mid section former bar girls and so on who are using the internet. so the public also exists on the internet. There is that kind of conceptualization as well. If we specifically speak of trans women, um, we know from the work of our earlier feminist scholars that sex work in red light areas is predominantly done by Dalit and lower caste women. And this continues to be a point of tension. In fact, it really reframed how sex work was conceptualized, and really brought out this idea that this is actually, and it explains Dalit and Bahujan feminist resistance to really seeing sex work as work and seeing it like, say, manual scavenging and so on, seeing it as caste-based labor. So I think it is complicated, but the experience of the internet does show us that it is not only Dalit and lower caste women operating in the public domain, which is the only experience of transactional sex. There are others which we have not looked at. In terms of yes, I'll close with just completely agreeing that actually the experiences of trans and male sex workers is something that we haven't looked at so far. In another study that I had done, it was a 5-country study where we looked at how the experiences of women, men, and trans persons was very different in terms of the violence that they experienced. So, for example, trans sex workers experienced an inordinate amount of verbal abuse. Male sex workers experienced an inordinate amount of physical violence, whereas women sex workers faced a massive amount of sexual violence. Of course, all suffered all, but that was the very specifically gendered sort of experience that they had. And those kind of insights then help NGOs really respond to these groups differently. Yeah, but there's lots to think about in what you said. So thank you for that. Sunita and then Janani.
Thanks, Manjima. This was such a brilliant, connection between the various frameworks, thinking, ideology, movement-based. I think that it took me back to 20 plus years when some of us were also trying to understand deeply the sex workers movement in the Durbar Mahila collective in Kolkata, and also their articulation at that time of issues of choice, consent, also intimacy, how they looked at, um, you know, their work as labor, but also how it created intimacy, companionship, mutual relationships of trust, of support, and also a kind of a little family of their own that they could build and create and nurture. So I'm happy to see that these dots go forward, and I like the link to the smart cities that you have made post-globalization, also where in the context of the smart cities do many of these geographies exist across the genders, going beyond the binaries. And I also know how difficult some of these conversations are. A few years ago in Delhi, Meena Seshu and the network of sex workers brought together various women's groups from the left, progressive movements, feminists, to really look at the frameworks. And we know that it's very polarizing. We also know that the debates, I mean, the conversation with anti-trafficking groups is almost well-nigh impossible. But I think that opening up much of this new and deeper understanding and the right to privacy is an area that I think would be very, very meaningful. And especially in the context of COVID, we've seen the diversification of how the informal work and especially sex work has, transformed itself into using technology, moving beyond surveillance, questioning moralities, etc. But I think until there's a strong collective, did your work show that um, for new, for gaining strength, for looking for support? Did collective support play a role? Is there a movement that supports many of these workers at their, in their workspace, in their personal lives, etc.? Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. Excellent points. No, there was actually it. These were all solitary operators, solitary service providers, and there was no strong collective at all, which made them actually. It was so hard to actually find sex work escorts who one could speak with. It was much more easier to find to really speak with clients. So a lot of the book is about actually just seeking escorts to speak with. But one of the big observations is that the absence of strong collectives, and that makes them extremely vulnerable. At the same time, there is instead one finds groups of clients, one would say, men who are surfing the net, and so there are these boys clubs online and so on. The whole which actually is similar to the experience of most gig workers, right, Sunita? So actually one of the things that I land on in the book, in Intimate City, is that perhaps we need to look at escorting or this kind of transactional sex not as sex work at all. And so many of them would ask me that, is this prostitution? Does it look like prostitution to you? It's not to us. So while initially I would take it as they're just trying to distance themselves from the stigma, but over when I was kept thinking about it, I realized that yes, actually what's happening is actually just how the gig economy works out. So escorting and so on should actually be seen as part of the gig economy, rather than the informal sector, which is the primary understanding of through which we have an understanding of sex work. So just like other gig economy workers also operate solitarily and without any collective, it is the same for the escort or for other service providers in on doing online sexual transactions.
Interesting.
And the other points you raised, the whole idea of intimacy, it is, we have intimate relationships of different kinds in our lives, right? Like with doctors or with the pediatrician or with our nannies. Like there are different kinds of relationships which we can say they are more intimate than other working relationships. And it is an interesting framework actually to try and understand why this heightened anxiety about about sex workers in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And when you speak of this even 20 years back, the idea of sex work, it is so much, it feels like just a discursive shift, what has, and in terms of self confidence or self empowerment of a person, but in terms of actually accessing services and so on, it feels like there is no meaning. And actually what would have meaning is ideas of citizenship. And if that can happen through these kind of mobilized, like really creating cities, seeing sex workers as a constituency that has something to say about how cities are built, or how the internet is, the experience of the internet is, then maybe it can translate into something more meaningful. But I found that actually this idea of sex work, while being very powerful as an idea, it actually it remains at a discursive level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Janani?
Yeah, hi, sorry, just needed a sec. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, well, yeah, just first wanted to start off by saying that it was really interesting to hear about the work that you've done, and some really interesting insights. I think some takeaways were those three kind of attributes of invisibility, conditionality, and cost. When you look at kind of women's lives with those three lenses, it was very interesting to see so many things kind of fall in place. So so yeah, thank you for sharing a lot of that. I'd like to understand a little bit more, or would love to hear your thoughts. You know, this I like how you express this, the expectations of asexuality in the workplace, and I think just that articulation of that is so important. And you know, the reference that you made to the fact that the Me Too movement brought that aspect to the forefront. But I think what's interesting to me is it brought to the forefront that that's an issue, but I still don't feel like it's being recognized, that that whole idea of that is the expectation of women, right? So how within institutions and organizations do, you know, people who are trying to change the status quo start having those conversations, because sexuality in itself is so taboo in the professional world as a term, right? I mean, people are starting to get a little more comfortable with the idea of gender equity, but how do you really, because that's an area that I'm very interested in delving into, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on how one begins that conversation.
Nice question. Um, yeah, I think the struggle with institutions and organizations is actually that you know, for anything you just have to go to HR. Like there's no platforms actually to talk about um, workplace processes. You know, you either go to HR in many or the death of unions, or actually, although they're being revitalized now more and more, the absence of, say, groups and committees and so on. So I find something like, for example, you know, where I work, there is the diversity, equity, inclusion committee that's been set up. So this idea of having committees, I find really interesting and a great space to actually talk about a lot of these issues. And I think post-COVID, lots of workplaces have caregiver committees. So you know, support groups for people who are maybe doing looking after elderly parents or and so on. So there are those kinds of groups that are coming together. And I think COVID has had, there's been, this pandemic has given us an opportunity to have these kind of sort of subcommittees and groups. Within university settings, the sexual harassment committees have been a space where things are discussed like this. However, they've largely been response oriented. So they respond to complaints. They don't necessarily talk about these broader issues. I find some workplaces have also very interesting, um, uh, for example, the Godrej India Culture Lab used to have these events, you know, where a lot of the staff of the Godrej groups would come to attend, and that would be a starting point of conversations around certain things. So, I mean, I think people are trying different ways, subjects to the workplace that establish them as human beings, you know, with lives outside just working, or you know, they're coming with their whole beings and real lives sort of to contend with. um, and it's a beginning, but I think the specific conversations around Me Too, I'd be interested actually if there's anybody else in the audience who works in a into office culture. Like, has it, I know it's become just a phrase, right? Iska Me Too ho gaya. You know, things like that. Like there is a, it's become a shorthand for something. But the real change, I wouldn't really know what's happened, and I'd love to know more actually. Anuradha has her hand up.
But
And
before Anuradha
Swarna?
comes in, let me just say that actually when people approach us to do workplace sexual harassment compliance work, we often let them know that we're also available to talk about organizational culture. Some of our presentations look very broadly at some of these elements of the context of the work. Not everyone takes us up on the invitation, but it's available. Anuradha?
Yeah.
Yeah. Manjima, thank you so much for this discussion. I'm really interested in sort of exploring more this idea that you mentioned, that maybe we should start looking at some aspects of the work that you mentioned, especially the escort services and things like that, is gig work. And I'm someone who's interested in the intersection of tech and society, and I sort of follow closely some of the stuff on digital labor. And what I find is that the current discourses on gig economy are not very different from uh, what exists in the informal sector, which is around, social security, precarity, inflation, lack of unionization, and things like that. So I'm interested in understanding, what do you think is the sort of transformative potential of changing the discourse from informal to gig work? I mean, I think one that I can see clearly is probably uh, destigmatization, or coming away from the sex exceptionalism that sort of gets associated with some of this labor. But other than that, I'm curious to think about, to know what is the transformative potential you see in changing this discourse.
Thanks, Anuradha. I have struggled with that. Honestly, I keep asking myself, so what? And I feel that it actually, the only answer I've come up with so far is that it actually removes the moral, the moral framework becomes a little more dislodged, which has value overall, not to just how we understand sex work, but generally to how people engage with their own bodies, or look at seeking pleasure, seeking intimacy, or sex in general. And that's one part of the answer. The other part is actually what does, and it's fascinating to hear you say that the gig economy is actually similar to the informal sector. I hadn't made that connection, so thank you for that. I wonder what I think more important than the gig economy, it is actually the context in which the gig economy has emerged as so big that is important. And that is the conversation on precarity. And so it can actually lead us to understand much better what is this new, what is this precarity, and how can we, because it feels like this experience of precarity, which is everywhere across classes, can really be a moment to push back against the kind of globalization and neoliberal development that has happened so far. And as of now, these are my only two sort of responses to your question, but it's something I'm really thinking about also.
Manjima, there are questions in the chat. Biraja actually has a follow-up. She wants to know about accessing this 5-country study that you mentioned. Maybe you can leave a name in the chat at some point or say it. Varsha Gopal has a question. Hello, and thank you for a wonderful session. I just had a question regarding one of the macro shifts you were talking about. Could you explain a bit more about how globalization induced migration and gentrification have altered the geography of sex work in Mumbai? Thank you.
Sure. So it's the gentrification of red light areas has happened around the world in different ways. In some places there's been contestation, there's been like fights between resident groups, between sex workers groups, and so on. Particularly in Mumbai, we've seen that Kamathipura is changed. Kamathipura is the red light area here, and it is fundamentally changed for largely what Bishakha Datta, who's a filmmaker and an activist, calls AIDS, raids, and trades. So it's actually the whole experience of HIV/AIDS, and sort of was the first dhakka to Kamathipura that really reduced footfall. There's been also just police raids because of the rescue industry have made it a nuisance to actually continue operating from Kamathipura. And then trades. Kamathipura is a space that runs round the clock. So it's become a site where you have a lot of these new factories, like Saria factories or cap making or bag making. Like all kinds of factories are actually have now been set up. So you don't see brothels there anymore as much as you do factories. So, these are some of the things. The other thing, of course, is that Kamathipura is real estate gold. And so there is a lot of these raids are actually targeted at cleaning out buildings so that they can be raised to the ground, and then these high rises sort of put up. Other things are really the migration that's happened from central Mumbai to the suburbs, and the fact that actually with mobile phones, most women, it's changed from one red light area to many smaller clusters alongside, specifically for in Mumbai. And also the fact that now you don't need to be in a particular place. You can just operate through your mobile phone. Yeah, those are some of the examples. And Biraja, I'll post the link if I can just find it right now. And while Swarna, can you tell me any other questions that I must have missed?
Kanika has a follow-up comment. Kamathipura has changed. I started my journey in social work with AIDS awareness in Kamathipura in 1989 with Dr. Gilada and Sunil Dutt Sahib. There is so much awareness now and considerable decrease in exploitation by pimps and touts. I know that Shakti had a question, so I'm just going to invite her to unmute and ask it.
Hi Manjima, thanks very much for your talk. I've typed my question in the chat, but I can just read out what I've typed.
I can't see it.
Okay. Anyway, I'll just read it out. So I was wondering if your research brought up any findings on the HIV/AIDS discourse and activism surrounding sex work, particularly from a human geography perspective, because I know that you said that you were quite influenced by the discipline of human geography itself in shaping your work more broadly. So I was just wondering, for example, if you look at scales and all that, how, if that came in at all in your research, if that was something you looked at, this whole discourse around HIV/AIDS.
So the HIV/AIDS discourse has actually led to the emergence of a whole sector. So I in Kamathipura, for example, it is the clinics through which a lot of activism happens. That's also the area around which research has happened, but it's very lean at the moment. There has been a withdrawal of funds, for HIV/AIDS work now, and so the structures remain, but they do other things. So, for example, they might help in post-trade recovery. Clinics are where, that's actually the place you go to for all the information. And a lot of the NGOs operate specifically around that. There was a joke that if you went to Kamathipura, you'll find more health researchers than you'll find sex workers, and it's not true anymore. You won't find many health researchers, and you won't find many sex workers either, or as many.
But Manjima, may I come in here?
Yeah, Sanita.
Also to do with your big construction lobby, right? I mean, land grab, diversification of the economy in the hands of elites and those few people, because I have worked as a student and for a number of years around that area, Kamathipura, Baikala, etc., that entire area, Muhammad Ali Road, etc. And you can see, I mean, I haven't been to Bombay in a long time now, but you can see that when you're talking about smart cities, you're also looking at how land grab, corporate power, decision making, new forms of governance, which sidesteps local governance structures, actually take control over the city and its infrastructure and who it might be for. So I think this is an area that also needs to be understood over and above the very many other factors that have dispersed and, you know, pushed and marginalized women in sex work and in other informal sectors. I think it's true for other women also, whether they're vegetable vendors or they're others, how smart cities have marginalized them and pushed them out of the city. And so their voices, as you said, I mean, it's not just about, you know, smart cities is also about whose voice counts and how do you shape the governance, the infrastructure to meet the needs of all. So just a point to be made. Thanks.
No, you're absolutely right. I think the struggle, Sunita, is also that how does one, what is the challenge one can pose to this, mafia? I mean, it is, if the police are in collusion, although the police themselves don't really know, they're just operating on. So, I in the book, Bishaka and I followed a raid that took place in the Simplex building in 2012, I think, where 400 people, 400 women, just overnight taken away from that building cleaned out. And we sort of followed that raid, and which took me to the special court, and then I followed the judgment on that. And the judgment, I mean, it really completely ignored the fact that there are 400 women who were picked up in that raid, and focuses on, okay, these women have to go back to Bangladesh, these women have to go to Bengal, these women have to go to other states, and sort of really looking at it as trafficking.
Yeah.
Completely ignoring the wider situation in which this has happened. So it's a big challenge, and I think it's not just for sex workers, it's generally even smart. I don't know how the community that works on creating inclusive cities has been thinking about actually challenging the real estate mafia. Yeah. And to Shakti's point, I'm actually reminded when you talked about globalization-induced migration, about how actually Kamatipura now, the population, it's not brothels led by madams, it is family units, and most of it is, the vegetables have changed because there are so many Bengali migrants from 24 Parganas. So you hear, activists saying that, oh, there is potol bhaja or parmal, fried parmal being made in every household, and so the kind of vegetables which are available there have also changed to match the kind of migration that has happened. Swarna, were there any other questions that I might have missed?
No, there aren't any other questions. There are lots of compliments and thank yous, which I will let you read. Also, I think I'll get them in the chat transcript with the recording. I will just say thank you. I think the way that you've put these projects, this research journey, and all of its insights together, for people like me who don't work in this area, there's enough to think about for many weeks. We'll come back, we'll remember, and have aha moments down the line, thanks to your very, very clear and connected presentation. So thank you very much for doing this, and come back again soon with another book or without. Thank you everybody else for attending and participating and discussing. I hope that you will attend regularly. We do this every month, second Saturday of the month, 10:30 to noon. And we don't meet in May and January for local reasons, but would love to see you regularly. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Manjima. Thank you, Swarna. This has been a brilliant morning. Much love. Bye.
With a brilliant speaker.
Absolutely. Bye.
Thank you so much. I'm just putting the link. I just put the link to the study, whatever the first link that I could find. It's called The Rights Evidence. It was a multi-UN agency study.
Yeah, got it. Somebody else, some other participants already gave it to me through private chat. So yeah, but anyway, thank you.
Great.
Now we all have it.
Thank you so much, Swarna, for really letting me think through some of these things with you all.
That's exactly what this space is about. We don't have enough spaces where things can be works in progress, the conversations can be safe. And that's exactly what we wanted.